Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Hughes. I'm a principal researcher with the American Institutes for Research, and I'm also the director of the CTE Research Network. Thanks so much for joining our session today, connecting practitioners and researchers to study the impact of CTE. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the CTE Research Network, the things that we're working on, and I'm going to introduce the studies that are part of the network, and you're going to hear from them in a little bit about the great research that they're doing on CTE. The network is a $5 million 5-year grant from the Institute of Education Sciences at the U.S. Department of Education. That's the nonpartisan research arm of the Department of Education. And as I said, I'm leading the Institute along with my great partners. Dr. Shaun Dougherty from Vanderbilt is my co-PI, and we also have partners from ACTE and Jobs for the Future. The goals of the network are to increase the evidence base about the impact of CTE programs on student outcomes. You're probably aware there's a lot of research on CTE, but very little of it is causal. Very little of it actually shows cause and effect, that for students who participate in CTE programs, that participation causes them to have particular outcomes. The Department of Education and others recognize that we really do need more causal research, so we're trying to encourage that. And part of that is to increase the pipeline of new CTE researchers who are going to devote their careers to doing this type of research. We also want to better coordinate the field around disseminating, understanding, and using research, and bring practitioners and researchers together to share and understand research needs. So we want to help practitioners use the research, but it's really important to have your input on what the research questions should be and what researchers should be looking at to better help you in your work. This shows our areas of focus. As I said, research, increasing the number of studies. We do have some summer training to encourage and train new researchers in the field and quantitative causal methodologies. We're coordinating the research projects. We bring researchers together to talk about challenges to doing causal research, talk about their methodologies, and come up with ideas for new research projects. And then, as I said, dissemination is really important to get the findings from research out to the field so that people can use it in their work. Just really briefly, I want to talk about the different types of research, since we are really focusing on causal research, as I said. So descriptive research is simply the numbers. How many programs are there? How many students are enrolled? How many students are concentrating in CTE? How many students graduate? How many students complete their research programs? That's descriptive research. Correlational is when we find statistical associations between variable. So when students take more CTE, they're more likely to graduate. They may be more likely to earn higher wages than students not taking more CTE. But unless you use some kind of causal methodology, there's no evidence that those associations are causal. They may be, but that really needs to be shown in the research. So causal research, it does establish that causal link and uses different methodologies. I'm sure you've heard about random assignment types of methodologies, but there are others like regression discontinuity and matching and other designs that can really show that causal relationship. So does CTE work? Well, as I said, we need causal studies. Why do we not have so many causal studies? Well, there are some challenges to that. Funding issues, it can be pretty expensive to do causal studies, but there are also methodological issues. You know, CTE, as you know, it's not one thing. CTE has a lot of different components. And how do we define that? How do we define what a CTE participant is? What are they participating in exactly? Is it just courses, or does it also include work-based learning, student organizations, other activities? And who is the control group? That can be really challenging right now because the majority of high school students take at least one CTE course. So finding students who could be part of a control group who have no CTE experience at all to compare to CTE students is pretty challenging right now. So all of these things have really been barriers to causal research, continue to be barriers, but researchers are figuring out ways to do more studies. Now, as I said before, we're really trying to increase the dialogue, the conversation between researchers and practitioners. You really are the best source of research questions for CTE. Researchers should not be coming up with research questions on their own without talking to you, without talking to the field. And we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear, for one, how do you currently use research in your work? Do you use research? Where do you go to look for and find research? How can we make our research findings more actionable, maybe more digestible, more accessible for you in the field? And what research would help you in your work? What research questions can you suggest for us? And we'd love to have your ideas. We'd love to get a conversation going on this at the end of the session and in other venues. So please do share your ideas in the chat box, and hopefully we'll get back to them at the end. I do want to make you aware that coming soon we have some practitioner training modules. These are free online modules that are meant for practitioners and policymakers to better understand and use data and research, particularly causal research. Each module contains PowerPoint slides, handouts, activities. We're going to have a facilitator's guide for each of them. For example, some are going to focus on understanding data, using data and research to improve your programs, and how to use research to design your program for equity. These will again be free on our website in just a few weeks. We also have a longer session on these modules at this conference, so please do look that up. That's with my colleague, Cherise Moore. She'll be going into more detail on what these modules will contain and how you can access them and use them. Now, I'm going to just briefly talk about the studies that we have underway. These are the causal studies that are part of the CTE Research Network. And then we're going to turn to some of these researchers who are going to tell you a bit more about what they're looking at in their research and their findings. So these are the 5 studies that are now part of the network. Dr. Shaun Dougherty at Vanderbilt University and his colleagues at the University of Connecticut, they're looking at the causal impact of attending the technical high schools in Connecticut. We have a large study going on in New York City by James Kemple of NYU. We have a study of the P-TECH 9 to 14 schools being done by MDRC, and there is a session at the ACTE conference focused just on the P-TECH model and that P-TECH study. So if you're interested in more information on that, please look that up. We have the evaluation of Korean College Promise with Julie Edmunds from UNC Greensboro, and our brand new study also from MDRC is on technology-based career advising tools. And we don't know a lot about those, so this is really a welcome study for us to learn more about how those influence students' choices and academic performance. So I'm going to turn it over to Shaun, then you're going to hear from Julie, and then you're going to hear from Ivonne Garcia of MDRC to talk about those studies. If you'd like more information again on the New York City study, please go to our website and also attend the P-TECH school session at ACTE. Thanks. Shaun?
Hello, my name is Shaun Dougherty. I'm an associate professor of public policy and education at the Vanderbilt University. And I'm pleased to share a study along with my colleagues Eric Brunner and Steve Ross from the University of Connecticut on the effects of career and technical education evidence from the Connecticut Technical High School system. And this is work that has been generously supported by the Institute of Education Sciences. And we're very grateful for that funding to support the work. In this work, we study a statewide system of standalone high schools that all focus on technical education. As it's organized in Connecticut, it's its own school district. of 16 high schools, and students can apply from any of their home residentially assigned high schools to attend these schools. The case is that these schools get more applicants than they can accommodate, and as a result, they've developed an admissions process whereby they rank students on application criteria and then admit students in descending order in those rankings until they run out of seats. And the result is, if they have 200 seats for an incoming class of ninth graders, that the top 200 students in general get in, but the 201st student does not. And so we compare students right on the edge of those who get in and those who don't get in, and look at their subsequent outcomes to see what difference in those outcomes can be attributable to getting into the school. And we find really large positive effects. All of those effects are for boys only, and they show up in the form of elevated probability of graduating from high school, elevated probability of being employed for more quarters, and earning substantially more through the age of 25. In terms of college going, which we also look at, we find a large negative difference initially. So, at the point of transition from high school to post-secondary life, students from the technical high schools are much less likely to attend college, but by age 23, we find no difference. Importantly, we also find positive impacts on test scores and on attendance. And we think this provides evidence that additional learning in the form of math and English language arts is occurring relative to the schools they would have attended if they had not gotten in. We also take the attendance impacts to be evidence of improved engagement in school, which could help drive the graduation outcomes. But I will just reiterate here that we only find effects for boys. In fact, the effects on girls are fairly precise and zero, which means we can rule out the possibility of them being positive or negative. And we also find that the impacts are not limited to any particular student group or geography. And so these effects are in fact broad-based and apply to the population of students in Connecticut who might apply. To just provide a little more context on the structure, the Connecticut Technical High School System now has a new acronym, but importantly, I think it's worth highlighting, it's a quasi-independent, so it's supervised by the state, not by any local school board. High school district of choice, as I mentioned earlier, it's all high schools. Students can elect to apply to these schools during the 8th grade. Across these 16 schools in our study, they enroll about 8% of all high school students across the state of Connecticut, with about a third of that total coming from the largest cities, meaning the other 2/3 are coming from the suburban and rural fringe areas of the state. There are no residential restrictions, so unlike some other schools of choice, technical schools of choice in other states, you do not have to live in a particular town to be eligible to attend any particular school. And if you think about what's different about these schools, other than them being schools of choice that students have to apply to, the experience is likely different in important ways. So for instance, almost all of the elective coursework, so the non-graduation requirements, are CTE offerings. And those CTE offerings fall into between 10 and 17 different programs of study, depending on the school, with programs of study sort of being representative of what you might expect. In grade 9, students explore between 3 and 6 programs of study, depending on what school they're enrolled in. They break up the school year kind of equally across these groups so that students can explore a number of options. And then at the end of 9th grade, there is matching to a program for grades 10 through 12, depending on student preference, as well as fit with the program as determined by the school. From what you would expect from a CTE concentrator or completer, students will then, across the rest of high school, take at least 3 full year-long courses in an aligned program of study. As part of that experience, they also will have stable groups of peers and instructors in grades 10 through 12, with some possible exceptions of a student or two moving in or out here or there, but for the most part, these will be stable cohorts. And then just for comparison, at comprehensive high schools in Connecticut that send the most students to the technical high schools, were students to remain there, they'd really only have between 2 and 4 different programs to choose from per school, and they would not have these other features about exploration in grade 9, as well as the cohort model to follow. In order to visualize the impacts of getting into the school on later outcomes, we have a few figures here. On the horizontal axis in both figures is the application score, where more positive numbers correspond to higher scores and negative numbers correspond to lower scores. The vertical dashed line is the admissions cutoff. 0 represents that cutoff. And then on the vertical axis, on the left-hand side, we have high school graduation, and on the right-hand side, we have college enrollment in the fall after graduating high school. And there's a large positive gap between folks who are above the cutoff for high school graduation compared to those that were below. And this sort of large gap represents the positive impact on high school graduation that occurs as a result of being above the red dashed line and getting into the school compared to being below and not getting in. On the right-hand panel for college enrollment, you can see a similar setup, but a different effect, wherein you can see that there is a lower probability of attending college immediately after high school among students who got in and attended the technical high school. This, for many pathways, it aligns with program expectations. And as I mentioned at the start, there's no difference in college enrollment by age 23. You can see a similar figure here on earnings. We have log earnings on the left-hand side. That's just a function of how we modeled things, but there's a large positive gap in log earnings that represents the 30% increase in earnings that we see among students who get into the technical high school. That also is reflected by working more quarters after high school in our sample. So in terms of implications for policymakers and practitioners, we think we have found convincing evidence of a positive impact from a whole school model of CTE operating at scale in a state with a fairly heterogeneous economic and demographic population, which means that this is a model that potentially could be replicated in other settings, serving students in contexts similar to those of Connecticut. Importantly, while the technical high schools do offer more CTE programming, more variety in the programming than the comprehensive high schools that they would have to which they were assigned and they would have attended otherwise, we find that this explains a very relatively small share of the overall impact, which suggests that other dimensions of the school experience, for example, the cohort model, the work-based learning experiences, the opportunity to explore programs in 9th grade, generate the majority of the impact. And this suggests that, again, for implications, that simply offering more programs may not generate the size of effect we find in a comprehensive school setting, but that the other elements of the treatment of attending these technical high schools likely is meaningful when thinking about kind of whether and how this model could be scaled. So we appreciate the opportunity to share this work with you all and are glad to entertain questions electronically and during the discussion. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Julie Edmunds, and I'm from the SURF Center at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. I'm delighted to talk with you about our study, the Evaluation of Career and College Promise. This is a 5-year project funded under the State and Local Evaluation Grant Competition by the Institute of Education Sciences. We started on July 1st, 2019, so we're a bit over a year into the project. Our partners on this project include the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, the North Carolina Community College System, and RAND Corporation. What is Career and College Promise? Essentially, this is North Carolina's dual enrollment program. It includes 3 main pathways. So cooperative innovative high schools are separate schools, like early colleges, and some of them are career academies, but they all have a strong partnership with a post-secondary institution that allows students to earn associate degrees or 2 years of transferable college credit. The other two pathways are housed at regular comprehensive high schools. The college transfer pathway includes college courses designed to lead to an associate degree or the general education requirements of a 4-year institution. Now, the third pathway, and the one of most interest to people at this conference, is the CTE pathway. These are dual enrollment CTE courses that are intended to lead to technical credentials or workforce-based majors. Within this pathway are sequences of courses, the pathways that you're more familiar with, that students can take. As you can tell, our project is looking comprehensively at all of Career and College Promise. Here are the project goals that are most relevant to CTE. So a primary goal is to understand the impact of participation in the CTE pathway on students' performance in high school, their enrollment and performance in post-secondary education, their earning of some sort of a post-secondary credential, and ultimately their employment and earnings. We're also going to explore how impacts differ for specific student subgroups and by school level implementation factors. Our study is also seeking to understand varying aspects of implementation of the CTE pathways. We'd like to understand differences in participation and reasons for those differences. We want to understand the extent to which the program was implemented as intended. Are students completing pathways? And then to what extent are those pathways aligned to post-secondary opportunities? We will also be looking at the implementation of a state-mandated career coaching program that is intended to help students make the transition from high school to college and career. Finally, we will examine the costs and cost effectiveness of the CTE pathway. I do want to point out that there is a growing research base about early college and dual enrollment more broadly, but there is very little about CTE dual enrollment courses. So we believe our research will make a significant contribution. And so as I said earlier, we're about a year into our project. We don't have impact results yet, but we do have some descriptive findings. So in the 1920 school year, we know that almost 12,000 high school students took an estimated 35,000 college level courses through the CTE pathway. Interestingly, about a quarter of those courses were actually college transfer courses, a finding which we plan to explore in more depth. When we look at the demographics of participating students, we see the percentage of males and females is almost equally distributed, and the racial and ethnic percentages are close to representative, although Black students are underrepresented compared to their percentage of the population in the state. Students taking the CTE dual enrollment courses had about a 75% success rate. These data are available through a series of dashboards that have been created by the North Carolina Community College System under the auspices of our project. Feel free to visit the website and play around with these dashboards. I wanted to conclude by giving you a teaser of when we may have actual impact results. We are conducting analyses now that explore reasons students give for taking or not taking different pathways, and we plan to have those results ready to share next spring. We hope to have high school and post-secondary impacts in about a year, and we'll also have results from our study of the implementation of career coaches by next year. Impact on wages and earnings is probably a couple of years out. When we have updated results, we look forward to coming back and sharing them at a future ACTE conference. Thank you.
This presentation is about an evaluation of the impact of technology-based career advising tools on high school students' CTE choices and academic performance. My name is Ivonne Garcia, and I'm the co-PI for this study, and I work at MDRC, which is a research nonprofit evaluation firm. This evaluation is being funded through a grant from the Institute of Education Sciences, U.S. Department of Education. The study is being led by MDRC, and we have partnered with communities and schools and the Kauffman Foundation to recruit schools for the study. Our technology partners are Naviance and U-Science. Why is this study significant? Many schools use technology-based tools to help advise students on career options and to supplement guidance counselor capacity. U-Science, for example, is currently used in 1,200 schools in all 50 states, and Naviance is currently used in almost 40% of all secondary schools nationally. Yet, there's currently no evidence about the efficacy of these tools for supporting student decision-making in CTE. These tools work through a series of assessments designed to help students uncover innate aptitudes and talents in the case of science, or personality traits in the case of Naviance that are matched to specific career types or domains. Based on the results from these assessments, the tools provide recommendations to students about careers to explore, and they provide information about career and education pathways. These recommendations are distinct because they expand beyond students' self-reported interest and counselor advice, both of which may be driven by unconscious biases about students' race, gender, and class. There are three components to this evaluation. There's an impact study, an implementation study, and a cost study. The impact study is a 3-arm school-level random assignment. We are seeking to recruit between 60 to 90 schools for this study. 1/3 of the schools will be randomly assigned to science, another third will be randomly assigned to Naviance, and another third will be assigned to the business as usual control group. Schools that are randomly assigned to receive either science or Naviance will begin implementing the tools in the 9th grade with their 9th graders in the school year 2021-22. We will follow all students in the study schools for 3 years through 11th grade. One of the questions that the impact study seeks to examine or to answer is whether these tools have an effect on students' persistence in CTE course taking. In order to answer this question, we will look at course transcript data and CTE course taking. We will also seek to examine whether the tools have an effect on students' self-awareness about career aptitudes and interests and their knowledge of career options and career pathways. To answer this question, we will field a validated survey instrument given at baseline and 2 follow-up periods. Finally, we will also seek to answer or to examine whether the programs have an effect on students' engagement in school and progression toward graduation. And for this, we will look at student school records, specifically at attendance and credit accumulation. For the implementation study, we will conduct interviews with principals and school informants. We will also field a survey to school informants, and we will collect data from science and Naviance in order to answer questions about the context in which the tools were implemented, the fidelity of implementation, and students' exposure and dosage, as well as the service contrast between treatment and control schools. The cost study will look at both the direct and indirect costs per student of these technology-based tools. We will also compare the cost of these technology-based career advising to the business as usual costs. And we will also look at the cost effectiveness of these technology-based career advising tools. Thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, please contact me at Ivonne, that's Ivonne, .garcia@mdrc.org.
So thanks to my colleagues for joining us today. Thanks for your presentations. We'd really love it if you would sign up for our mailing list. You can do that right on the homepage of our website. And if you have any questions for the presenters, please go ahead and put them in the chat box. I hope to get a conversation going about those studies and any other research questions or research issues you'd like to bring up and discuss with us today. We'd really welcome that feedback. Thank you so much.